it's easy to talk about. It's easy to sum it up when you just talk about practice. We sitting here, I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice. Not a game. Not the game that I go out there and die for and play every game like it's my last. Not the game. We're talking about practice, man. I mean, how silly is that? And we're talking about practice.
Welcome if you're new, joining us for the first time, if you're watching us online or on the app, especially if you're getting over COVID. We hope that you're doing well, and be sure to fill out that digital Connect card. Let us know that you're here, how we can be praying for you. So I got this mic stand here because I'm about to show you something really cool. I don't know if I have it the right way or not, so we'll just work with it. So when my husband and I, we are about to celebrate our 19-year anniversary. So yeah. I got married when I was, 10? So very young. And when we got married, so right when we got married, Steve married into a card family. Some of you are card families, right? You love to play card games. And yeah, the one person over there likes to play card games. The rest of you are boring. So, but here's the thing. Steve was not very good at card games, so he had to learn all of the card games. And like when you add someone who doesn't know how to play cards into a group of people who do, they're kind of like the wild card, and you don't know if it's going to go well or not. You're like, why did you do that? That was a totally crazy move. But sometimes he won, sometimes he didn't. But one thing Steve was actually much better at than I was shuffling cards. So I don't think I have this right. Sorry. I don't use a mic stand often. There we go. So when we first got married, this is how I shuffled cards, right? And Steve would look at me and be like, that's not really, you're just kind of mixing them. You're not really shuffling them. I'm like, how else do you shuffle them? And so Steve started doing all these fancy tricks, of like one-handed. And I was like, I want to shuffle cards like that. And so I decided I was going to learn how to shuffle cards. And I walked around, I'm not kidding you, at work, I had this job where I was doing other things, and I could have a deck of cards in my hand all the time. So I started learning how to flip them with one hand, and then you eventually learn how to be like, oh, I can actually get them all together, and then you get them. That wasn't very good, sorry. That's how it first looked, And then you start getting like this, and then you can be like, ooh, I'm real fancy, right? And then you drop some, and I'm much better at it than I normally am today. So I'm going to hand this off to Steve, but I had to practice. I practiced a long time to learn how to shuffle cards so that I wasn't just mixing them together. And after a while, I got really good at it. Now, if you come over and play cards with us, I'm like, look how good of a shuffler I am. I've been doing it for 19 years. So, but it's that way with anything you want to get good at, right? Some of you are like, I am now going to carry a deck of cards. You are inspired to learn how to shuffle cards. But no matter what it is, say you are a master at something. Say you had this amazing talent that you could play the violin, or you could sing, or you could run, or whatever that is. And some of you have heard this rule before. Malcolm Gladwell has done research around this. And even if you are one of the best in the world at something, you have an innate talent. If you want to master that, whatever it is, it takes about 10,000 hours of practice. That's about 4 years straight of practice, right? And so even if you are naturally talented, now if you can't hear music at all, if you are tone deaf, 10,000 hours is not going to make you a master violin player. It just will not, right? You're not going to be like a musician if you don't have that natural innate ability. But even with the greatest talent, you still have to practice to get better at it. And it is the same thing when it comes to faith. Because too often we talk about faith and we make it seem like, well, you're saved by grace. You're saved by grace, which is true. You are saved by grace. You do not earn your salvation. It is a gift freely given. As soon as you accept Jesus, you receive the Holy Spirit who takes up residence. All of that is true. But here's what else is true. Grace is only going to change you to a certain degree. Grace doesn't do it all on its own. Dallas Willard says it well. He says, grace does not mean we don't have to do anything, or that whatever we do will bring the desired result. That isn't grace. Grace has to do with God acting in our lives in ways that enable us to do what we can't accomplish on our own. Grace is not opposed to action. It is opposed to earning. That's an attitude, not an action. Disciplines are actions not that earn us a reward, but that make possible the life we want to live. So what Dallas Willard is saying is, grace alone isn't going to change you into a person who lives and loves like Jesus. Grace alone won't do that. Just because you've been saved by grace doesn't mean that everything you then do afterwards is the right thing and done in the right way. In fact, he says, you have been given the ability, which is kind of scary, to choose what kind of person you eventually become. Your choices matter. What you give your time and attention to, what you value, will shape who you become. So grace alone will not make you just like Jesus. In fact, it's an intentional decision. Jesus even says in one of his parables, why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, and then don't do what I say? And he goes on, he says, it's foolish. It is foolish to call me Lord and not do what I say. It's like building your house on sand, and it's just going to fall down. And what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to rebuild it all over again. That's a silly way to live. Grace alone will not make you like Jesus. You have to intentionally choose to become like Jesus. You have to put your faith into practice. And Paul, he words it like this, and I love this. He says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life, your way of life before Jesus, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. And so this phrasing that Paul uses, it's the same phrasing used to like take off clothes and put on clothes. And so he's saying your old self, this self that was being corrupted by the ways of the world, that isn't redeemed in Jesus, you have to keep taking that self off. These are continual actions. You take that off, and then you have to put on your new self. These are things that you participate in. They're choices that you make. You don't just automatically become this new self. It's something that you have to keep choosing and putting on and working towards. And that's what our memory verse says. And each series, we started this as a practice a few series ago, that we have a memory verse in this card. And if you have a handout today, you have this. And if you only got one handout and there's two of you, there's extra cards out there. And if you're watching us online, we have cards available for you next week when you join us in person. But our memory verse, that we've been putting these out each series so that we do the discipline together of getting the Word of God in our minds and in our hearts. And our memory verse this series is this, from Philippians: fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will fill you. And this is Paul writing to a church in Philippi that he has been a part of and that he has helped found, and he knows and they know him. And he's saying, first of all, think about these things. Think about these things that are good and excellent and praiseworthy and wonderful. And that word think means to consider, to give careful thought to let your mind dwell on that. That's an active way of thinking. It's not just hope that these thoughts come into your mind, but to let your mind dwell on things that are good and wonderful and righteous and lovely. Those are the things that your mind should be actively seeking out. And then he says, put into practice what you have seen. He's saying, live the way that I've lived. He's pursued Jesus his whole life now. He has sacrificed everything, and he has learned the way of Jesus. And he's saying, put that into practice. Imitate my life. And that put into practice is a continual, ongoing, intentional work. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that you keep doing over and over again. It's something that you commit to. And he's saying, move beyond just contemplation. It's good to set your mind on these things, but also there's action involved in your faith. There's action that is needed. And so when we talk about discipleship here at the Well, that helps incorporate what we're talking about this verse, because we say that to be a disciple of Jesus, to be a disciple means to be a learner. That's what that word means. Disciple means learner. It doesn't mean expert. It means learner, someone who's learning the way of Jesus, right? And so to be a learner in the way of Jesus, we see that break down in three different sections of to come, spend time with Jesus, come and spend time with Jesus, and then we talk about learning from Jesus, learning the way that Jesus teaches us and how he illuminates the world and what he tells us is true. And then that third part of being a disciple is to go out in the world and live differently, to go be like Jesus, so that we come spend time with Jesus intentionally, learning from Jesus how to be like Jesus. That's this process. And when we think about discipleship, we do it as a circle because it's not a straight line. It's not like you come, hang out with Jesus, you learn a little bit, and then you just go for the rest of your life. It's this continual coming back, spending more time with Jesus, learning something new from Jesus, living that out in the world, then coming back and learning more from Jesus, and then going out into the world with that new knowledge. It's this, we call it our discipleship cycle. It's not a straight line. It's a continual, intentional way of living. It's something that we commit to. And so in this series, when we talk about practices, we're going to spend the next 10 weeks talking about intentional practices in the Christian tradition that help us lean into our faith, that help us put that into practice, that help us go deeper with Jesus. We're going to do that together, collectively, and we're going to give you ways in which all of these practices help bring us into the presence of God, help us learn from God, and help us to live differently because of them. That's how we're going to do this. We're going to come, see, and go with one another. And so, but it's important to remember that the practice in and of itself is not the point. And that's sometimes why people steer away from disciplines and all this, because they think, well, then I'm trying to earn something. You're not trying to earn anything. You don't earn a reward from God. The practice is about getting yourself into the presence of God. One person says it's about keeping company with Jesus. These practices help us become aware of the presence of God and help us open our hearts and our minds to what it is that God wants to show us, what it is that God wants to teach us. So the practice in itself is not the goal, but going deeper with Jesus is the goal. Going deeper in our faith, being transformed to live and love the way that Jesus lived and loved. And our first practice this week, I think, is really poignant. It's a really important one, especially coming off the season that we've been in. Our first practice is community. Community. Some of you might be thinking, like, is community really a practice? But it is. It's a practice. And especially thinking about the last 2 years, right, in the pandemic, and everything's been virtual, right? And some of you are like, if I do one more Zoom call, I'm going to lose my mind. Because we've learned, like, virtual school isn't like in-person school, right? Virtual meetings, not the same as in-person meetings. Virtual dating, not the same as real dating, right? None of this stuff is real. And I mean, Steve just listened to this podcast earlier this week where they're like, some churches are trying to think about how do we do like church in the metaverse and what is digital baptism going to look like? And I think, good night. I hope that is not a thing. I mean, maybe, I know I'm only in my 20s now since I've been married for 19 years. And, but I know I'm older than like this younger generation, but I think, man, I hope that one of the blessings that comes out of the pandemic, and I know there are not many, right? Like we have to kind of search for them, but I hope that one of the blessings that comes out of this pandemic is that we have this correction to our hyper-individualized society where we think the individual is apart from the community, that you stand apart from the people that surround you. There is no individual apart from the community. That just doesn't exist. And I'm hoping that, on the back end of this pandemic, one of the things that we come back to is our need to be in the presence of other human beings, that we remember that we are not an island, that you don't live self-contained, and that who you are is shaped by being in community with one another. And when we think about the Christian tradition, this has always been central to the Christian tradition, because when we talk about church, the word church in the Greek is ekklesia, and that doesn't mean building. It never meant building. It means the assembly of people, the gathered saints. Church, when we say the church isn't a building, we mean it. We're going back to the Greek. The church has never been a building. The church meets in buildings. The church gathers together in buildings, sure. But the church, that word has always meant the people, has meant the community of God. And so it's central to what Jesus has set up, a community that is founded in him. And Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am. The presence of God is found. When we want to talk about how community brings us into the presence of God, Jesus says, I'm there when the community gathers. Even if it's just 2 or 3 of you, I'm present. That's how we get into the presence of God. And the Christian community is brought together because of the presence of God, Dietrich Bonhoeffer says it like this: Christianity means community through Jesus Christ and in Jesus Christ. No Christian community is more or less than this. Whether it is a brief single encounter or the daily fellowship of years, Christian community is only this. We belong to one another only through and in Jesus Christ. And so when we talk about Christian community, we're saying it is a community that's brought together because of who Jesus is and who Jesus is in our lives. That's what it is. Even if it's just a single encounter or the long haul of regular community, of day in and day out building a community, that's what we're talking about. And the reason why this is so essential to what it means to be a follower of Christ is because we believe in the triune God. We believe in the Trinity, that God is three in one, that God is three persons and one being, and that God, in God's self, is relational. That God is, we are made in the image of a communal God. And that's why when the scripture says God is love, because love is always communal, right? You love someone else. Love is something that's given and received, and that is at the core of the God that we worship, the God that we were made in that image of. And so when we think about that, when we think about we're made in the image of the triune God, we are designed for community. Every human, not just Christians, every human being is designed to be in relationship with one another and with God. It's just who we are, built in to our DNA. And so to be made in the image of Christ means Christianity has to have community at the center. You can't do it on your own. That's just not the way it works. Christianity has always been communal. And Jesus, in his last meeting with his disciples, his last dinner, if you've been around here, you've heard me say this before, the final words that Jesus has at that meal that are found in John, in the Gospel of John, those are the most important words, right? He is aware of what's about to happen. And so he's sitting down with the people he's done life with for 3 years, and he's trying to impart to them the most important thing. And he says to them, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And so Jesus says the hallmark of what it means to be a follower of him, if you are a learner in the way of Jesus, if you have learned anything, it is demonstrated on how we love one another. That's the hallmark of discipleship. And so right there we see you can't be a disciple of Jesus all on your own, because the way in which people even know if you're a disciple of Jesus is how you love one another. Do you love one another as Jesus has loved us, which is to give everything? Jesus held nothing back. This sacrificial servant love. That's the hallmark of what it means to be a Christian. And I want to be honest, there's a reason why we shy away from Christian community and community in general, right? Because you feel vulnerable. You feel exposed when you're in community. People might see your weaknesses. We all have very well-crafted personas that we put out there when we're on our best behavior, right? And we can keep that up for an hour or two. But if you're with someone long enough, eventually they're going to say something that they're like, I shouldn't have said that. They're going to make a snarky remark, or they're going to have an opinion that's different than yours, and suddenly you're like, I don't know what I think about this. And not only that, you can get hurt in community. And I know there are some of you that are carrying around hurts from Christian communities, that you stepped in with all your heart, looking for this mutual, Jesus-centered, loving community, and you got burned. And you're not alone. There's a lot of people who carry those burns. It doesn't mean that we give up on it. Jesus didn't say, love one another until someone doesn't do it and then you're off the hook. That's not what it means. To love one another as he loved means he loved even when everyone abandoned him and betrayed him. So we don't give up on community. It's the hallmark of who we are. And so when we think about that, how we have to do life with one another, we can't do Christian community. We can't do Christianity without community. I think Paul gives a really good description of what that looks like, of what it means to be in community with one another. And this is found in Romans chapter 12. And he says this: don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong and hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. And when God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. And so he gives us this picture of what this life together, what this Christian community looks like. And the very first thing he says, the foundation of it all is love. And he says, love must be sincere. Love must be sincere. Don't just pretend to love one another. And that means like there's nothing false in your love. There's nothing that's just on the surface. You're not putting on an act. And he says, in order to do that, you have to hate what is wrong, hate what is evil. And that word hate means to loathe, to despise, to be like totally at odds with. And so those things that are wrong and corrupt and are bad, that hurt people, we are not indifferent to them. We loathe that. We look on that and think, no. And then he says to hold tight to what is good. And that word hold tight means to cling. And it is the same word used for a man joining with a woman, right? So this is an intimate, like be wholeheartedly united and joined and aligned, intimately aligned with what is good, with your whole being. He says that's the foundation for community right there, is that your love must be sincere. There can be nothing false in it. You have to loathe and despise that which would harm others, that which is not good. And you have to be wholeheartedly aligned with that which is good. And I'm here to tell you, as soon as you enter into Christian community, the things that are not right in your heart, they will be made clear to you, right? All those places where you actually are judgmental of others, and the sin that's like so easily clings to us, right? And all the things that we don't like about people, or the ways that we're like, well, I don't really want to be bothered by that. Like I would help, but that's inconvenient. Like all of that is going to come right to the surface as soon as you're in community, and you're going to see it, and you're going to go, oh, yuck, this is why I don't like this. If I stay by myself, I look really good. Like if there's no one around me, I'm the best looking person in the room in every sense of the word, right? As soon as you start adding other people, you're like, oh, shoot. Like you see all that stuff that's just not great. And so community is going to bring to the surface those things that God wants to talk to you about. When we talk about come, see, go, right? Getting in the presence of others, God's present. And if you want to learn what God has for you, be in the presence of others, because God's going to show you, well, here's this thing in your heart that's not so great. Here's this way that you view yourself or other people that's not right. And it's not just for God to make you feel bad, right? That's not what God's about. He's not here to be like, look how terrible you are. It's this way for God to start to heal those things. It opens a dialogue and a conversation for us with God when we're in community. If you want to see yourself clearly, see yourself with other people. And then he goes on to tell us how we're to be with one another. He says that's the foundation of Christian community. And this is what it should look like. It says first, it needs to be marked with genuine affection. And this is a nurturing love. It's the love for a parent for a child, right? So it's instinctual, it's protective. It's not something that you just put to the side, right? Like I always say with our kids, like, love you always, like you sometimes, right? Like kids aren't always likable, but we always love them. We always love them. We are always wanting what's best for them. I know some of you parents are like, man, she said the silent part out loud, but it's true, right? Kids sometimes are hard to like, but you always love them, right? And so what Paul is saying is your love for one another can't be something that you pick and choose. It needs to be something so instinctual that you are protective over your relationships with one another, that you have genuine affection for one another. And then he says to honor one another above yourself. And this is a big deal because this is a culture of honor and shame. And normally in honor and shame, it's about your honor, building up your honor in the eyes of others and avoiding shame or those who would bring shame on you. And so very often we view others as competition. Are you going to build me up and make my reputation look better or not? And Paul's saying to this community, don't do that with one another. Don't compete with one another. That's not what we're about. In fact, outdo one another in showing respect. Like work hard to lift other people up. Keep each of you, it should be like this competition. That's the way that you compete, is to say, how can I build you up more? Can I build you up more than me? That's the way you compete with one another. So he says to honor one another in a way that you are trying to outdo each other by showing one another respect, by building the honor of the other person. And then he says, never be lazy. Never be lazy. And this word means don't get sluggish. Don't get sluggish in doing the thing that ought to be done. Don't get sluggish in discipline. Don't get sluggish in the ways that God wants you to serve. Don't get lazy with one another. And we all know that we all have a little bit of lazy in us, right? And the pandemic has made us all a little bit more lazy than usual. Or you think, I have to go out, like actually physically go out to get something. I can't just order and have it delivered to me that same day, and I have to put on real pants. I don't know if I could do that. We got real lazy over this pandemic. But he's saying, in your relationships, don't get sluggish. Don't get sluggish with one another. Make sure that you're ready to do the thing that needs to be done. And that word can also mean to lag behind. And if you ever walked with someone that you're like, come on, pick up the pace. You're dragging everyone down. He says, don't be that person. Don't be the person that's lagging behind the group and just, slow to help, and that you've lost that zeal is the next word that he talks about. He says, serve enthusiastically. And that word is actually zeal. And that word in the Greek means to boil over, as in water, being so hot that it's boiling. So he says, don't be lazy, don't get sluggish. Instead, be boiling over with zeal in the Spirit. And so much so that it's boiling over to other people. Be stirred in your faith. And he says, what does that zeal look like? It looks like these three things. It says, rejoicing in hope. And that is the expectation of the good. So when we have this zeal, when we're boiling over in our faith, we can rejoice in what we know will be good, that we expect God to be doing good things. And he says to persevere in tribulation. And that word tribulation means when things feel like they're pressing in on you and weighing you down, pushing you down, to keep steady when life is crushing in on you. And that last one, he says, to be devoted in prayer. And that word devoted means to adhere, to glue yourself to prayer, and not to grow faint. And I can tell you, for myself, I can't maintain that zeal on my own, right? All left to my own devices, if I'm just isolated for long enough, I'm not boiling over in the Spirit, right? I need other people to help me be that way. But here's the other side of that, and you need other people to help you maintain that zeal, but other people need you to maintain that zeal. And sometimes we think about what we need out of Christian community, and we stop thinking about what it is that we bring to Christian community, and we borrow the faith of one another. There are times where you are so confident of God's goodness, and we only need hope when things look kind of bleak, right? You don't need hope if everything's great. You need hope when you're like, I am expecting good. I'm not feeling good right now, right? You only have to persevere when things aren't great, when life is crushing in on you. You don't have to persevere if you're like, hey, I'm just hanging out in this chair, reading a book, persevering. When things are going great, you don't need to persevere, right? You don't need to stay diligent in prayer if everything's already answered. We stay diligent in prayer when it feels like you want to quit. When you have to stay devoted to it. And we need each other to do that. There are times where I feel like I can't keep going. And I have people around me who are like, yes, we can. We can keep going. We're going together. And so it's like when I ran a marathon, there was this stretch at around mile 18 where I was like, I got in my head, because you're like, it's mile 18. You still have a lot of miles to go. It's 26.2 miles. You're like, oh, I'm almost done. You're like, I'm not almost done. I haven't even hit the 20s yet. And I was in my head for 2 miles straight. And then when I hit around mile 20, I saw someone running the wrong way, right? Coming at me. And I was like, who is that person? And then I realized, it's my best friend, Nate, running the wrong way. And Nate runs Ironman races and all that. And Nate, out of nowhere, broke all the rules, running in his jeans. And he's like, come on, I'm going to run this next mile with you. And he ran the next mile, and he got me to mile 20, 21 or something. He's like, you only have 5 left to go. You can do this. You're there, right? And that's this image of community where when you get in your head and you think, this is too long and I'm too tired and I can't do it. Sometimes you need that person to run the wrong way with you, to be like, come on, we're going. And sometimes someone needs you to be that person, that you have it in you. And what a loss for our community if you aren't present, if you aren't that person, if you don't see what you contribute as well. We need others to have that zeal. And then Paul later goes on to say, not only this, but as a community, you are to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Those who are so glad. Have you ever had someone tell you amazing news? Like that they're getting married or they're having a baby or they got a new job or whatever that is, and you just feel so excited for them? Like you are like bouncing around the house for them? Like that's how we should be with one another. But also, when those who are mourning, when those who are sad, when life has knocked them down, that we don't stand at a distance and say, I'm so sorry for you. That's so hard. But your sorrow is kind of too much for me. It's messing me up too. Paul says, no, you get right in there with them. That we come alongside one another, that we don't stand at a distance from each other, that each other's victories are our victories and each other's sorrows are our sorrows. That's this picture that he gives of what it means to be in community. We love others as Jesus loved us because that's what he did for us. He came right alongside us and met us where we needed to be. And we are called to do the same thing. And then the last thing he talks about in terms of how we're in community with one another is he says we are to be quick to share. Ready to share. And that word share means to have a deep involvement, like that you've worked yourself in, that you have a part, like you're a partner in it. And it's this active word. And so what he's talking about is when people are in need, we should be actively looking for how we can help that need, how we can step in. What is it that I have that you need right now? Whether that's a physical thing, an emotional thing, a connection, whatever that is, I'm ready to jump in and be part of what it is that you're doing. I have a stake in it. I'm a partner with you in it. I'm not just handing something to you. I've chosen to be deeply involved in what it is that's going on in your life. And so if we wanted to talk about what this practice of community looks like, this is how I would word it. Community is sharing in the love of God with one another. That's what community is. It's sharing in the love of God with one another. And this type of community, it is life-changing. It is life-giving and it is life-changing. It's amazing. I can tell you, my January has been very long, okay? I know some of you are like, just January is really low. We're not done. My January's been very long. I started out with the flu. Then I got a sinus infection, and now I'm getting over COVID, right? So I have been sick more of January than I've been healthy. I think I was healthy for maybe 5 full days in January. The rest of it I've been sick. And I have to say, I don't have any immediate family here. Like we don't have any relatives to come to our aid. But I have had so many meals dropped off, groceries dropped off, medicine dropped off, funny memes, like people just like sending me things around like, yeah, COVID's the worst, right? Like COVID's a jerk. COVID is a jerk, right? Like I'm struggling today, but people who asked how they could pray, people who asked like, does Imogen need anything, And I can tell you, when Jesus says the way you love one another will be a sign. It will be a sign to others about this community. My family, they are not believers, right? And they are far away. And they are like, are you guys okay? Do you need anything? And we're like, nope, we're good. This person brought this and this person did this and we're okay. And I can tell you, my family this week right now, they are sick. Each one of them, we're joking, but like there's 6 of them in the house and 5 out of 6 right now, each day, one person tests positive for COVID. And they don't have that. They don't have anyone dropping off meals. And sometimes, guys, we get so used to what it is to be part of a church and what we do for one another, we forget that that's not normal. There are so many people, they have friends, they have work friends, and they might send them some flowers or something, but there's not a lot of people out there who have a community that will rally around them when they're in need. There's just not. There are so many people that are lonely and isolated right now. And I can tell you, I'm so grateful for the community that rally around me, but I get a front row seat for the stories that happen in this community. And I can tell you, I'm not alone. There are so many of you who have had people in this community walk with you through times that are really hard, through divorces and job losses and financial needs and, when you've had someone that you love pass away. All of these things, we've had people who come alongside others because the staff can't do it. We're not a very big staff, right? Like, even though we're not a huge church, we're not a big staff. That's all we would try to do is spend all of our time keeping up on what's going on. But you all take care of one another. You all are that person for each other. You are quick to share with each other. And I get to hear that over and over again. And the type of community that Paul is talking about, it takes time and effort. It doesn't just happen overnight. It's not something that you show up and suddenly it's all there. But because we are united by Christ, the seeds of it are right there. It doesn't take that long to start to sprout because everyone is already thinking in that mind of Christ. How do I love as I have been loved? There's something really special about what it means to be part of a Christian community, and sometimes we forget that. If you've been part of the church for so long, and I know the church can be incredibly disappointing. I get it. I get that there are times where we mess up and we don't call at the right time or we don't say the right thing. But as a whole, this is different than what most people have. And we forget that because we're inside of it. And it's good to critique the church, but sometimes we need to take a step back and realize what we do well that nobody else does, but some people would die for, and they don't even know it's available to them. And that's the last part of what Christian community is meant to do. Paul, at the end of that passage, he says this. He says, always be eager to practice hospitality. And when we experience Christian community, true community, it spills out to those who are outside of our community. And that word hospitality, the Greek there is philoxenia, and that means love of the stranger. You know, we hear about xenophobia all the time, right? The fear of the stranger. But what we're called to do is love the stranger. And when you love someone who is a stranger, what happens? They're not a stranger anymore, right? They become a friend. And so the way that we could distinguish between community and hospitality, because community should lead us to hospitality. Community is sharing in the love of God with one another. Hospitality is sharing the love of God with an other, someone who is other than you, someone who is outside of your general circle of friends. So hospitality is not having your friends over for dinner. That's community, and that's wonderful. You should do that. You should have your friends over for dinner. Hospitality is when you invite someone who is outside, who is a stranger to you or to that group, and make them a friend, and invite them in and treat them as a friend. And Paul, when he says, practice hospitality, that word means pursue hospitality. Run hard after hospitality. And so it doesn't mean like wait for them to come to you. It means actively seek out ways in which to bring the stranger in and love the stranger. And Adele Alberg Calhoun, she talks about it this way. She says, because we have been welcomed into the love of Christ and received as dearly loved children, we can offer the world a place of safety and healing. We can incarnate the welcoming heart of God for the world. God welcomes strangers, inviting them to share his home and get to know his family. And so when we welcome someone who is outside of our normal group of people, our normal, maybe it's your family of origin, maybe it's your group of friends, we are extending the same welcome that Christ has extended to us. And here's the thing, though. Strangers mess things up, right? Strangers have the potential to mess things up. You have this perfectly planned Thanksgiving meal dinner or this family gathering, and you don't want to mess that up by bringing someone that you don't know what they're like. And I can tell you, Steve and I, so we lived in Michigan for 4 years, and in those 4 years, Michigan has some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. They're very, very nice. We didn't get invited to one Thanksgiving dinner, not one. In fact, a friend was like, several times, we wanted to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner, but our parents said no, because you're not part of the family. And you're like, well, that just felt really lousy, right? You're like, we're all Christians. Like, we're all great. Like, what do you think we're going to do? We're not that weird. But, we're a little weird, but not that weird. And it felt lousy, right? You felt like, here you are at an arm's length. And because they had this picture of, no, this is how Thanksgiving goes, and we don't want to bring someone in that might change what that looks like. That's the risk of hospitality. Hospitality is that you risk getting all of your expectations and all of your ducks that you've lined up in a row getting messed up because you brought someone who isn't a friend into the circle and treated them as a friend. And hospitality at the time that Paul is writing is essential. There are a lot of people who are traveling, if they're in a town that they don't know anyone, to bring someone in and share your resources, your space, and create a place of safety. That's what hospitality is about, is creating a place of safety and welcome for someone who might not have that. And as Christians, when we experience safety and welcome with one another, we should want to extend that beyond ourselves, to bring anyone who is standing on the outside of that community and welcome them in and treat them as a friend. We should be actively breaking down any of the barriers that divide us. That's who we're called to be in the world. And not to wait for it to happen, but to be on the lookout, to run after opportunities to make the stranger a friend. Again, Adele Alberg Calhoun, she says it like this: hospitality is not about impressing others with well-decorated homes and gourmet cooking. It's not simply for the gifted or those with clean homes. Neither is it just for women. Hospitality is a way of loving our neighbor the same way God has loved us. In fact, hospitality was so essential to the Christian community that it was a requirement for leadership in the early church, that you had to be someone who actively welcomed the stranger into your home. And we know that in the very early church, it was a lot of men, right? And so hospitality is not reserved for one half of the population. It's for all of us. Anyone who follows Jesus is called to open up whatever space you have to be a place of safety and welcome for someone who stands outside the Christian community. And so Christian community, the practice of community, has always been essential to Christianity. And it is a practice. It's not just something that happens to you. It goes beyond showing up just for Sunday morning. Showing up for Sunday morning is important. It is the saints collective. We're gathered and we're worshiping together. Something special happens when we do that. But that's not enough. I can tell you, I worked at a church and there was a lady who got sick, and she wrote into the church and was really mad. She was super, super mad that no one called or did anything for him. We're like, okay, who, the leadership's gathered. We're like, who is this? And we went through all, is she part of a small group? No. Is she on a team? No. Does anyone know her? No. So no one knew who this person was, but she just assumed because I show up occasionally on a Sunday morning, you should have known. We're like, did she call us and let us know she was sick? No, this was all afterwards. We're like, what were we supposed to do? If you just show up on the outskirts of a community and expect your needs to get met, that's crazy town, everyone, okay? Don't send me an angry email that we didn't call you if I don't know who you are and you're not involved in anything. I'll be like, I'm so sorry. Who are you? So community doesn't happen just because you show up on Sunday morning. That's a good starting point, right? That's a great starting point. You want to get to know people on this level of hey, can I talk to people there? Are people welcoming? Are they friendly? But if you want Christian community, it has to go deeper than that. It is a practice that you have to commit to yourself. And here at The Well, we say we exist to help all people of all ages, of all stages, wherever you are in your life. We help all people grow deeper, love wider, and live better by following Jesus. And we believe that is done best with one another. That you're only going to grow so far on your own. You can't love just yourself. That doesn't work. And if you want a better life, you need to do it with other people. And so this series, each week we're going to give you practical ways to live into whatever the practice is, in ways that you can step into it that week. And we're going to do that collectively. But this week, I'm going to challenge you to practice Christian community, to actually put that into practice. And there's 3 ways that you can do that. Okay? The first one is small groups. And I know this is and then this is where you pitch small groups. But I mean it. I believe that small groups are the primary place where discipleship happens. And we are working really hard to keep making that a place where discipleship happens. Where if you want to grow, that's where you go. And the way our small groups work, some of you might not know this, they work on semester basis. We have 3 rounds of small groups, and they normally meet between 7 and 9 weeks, right? You can do most anything for 7 to 9 weeks. It's not we don't even go into double digits, right? This one, you don't have to be 12 weeks, 7 to 9 weeks. And we meet for a period, and then when we're off, we ask that small group to serve and celebrate together, and that's something that we're building in. So, that's part of the way that we want to build in being a missional church, is that our small groups are out serving together, that our small groups are taking time to celebrate with one another. And so we've tried to design them in terms of fall, winter, and spring. Those are our rotations for small groups. And so it's not a huge time commitment, but we believe that 7 to 9 weeks is a good enough time to get to know one another. And if you're part of a crazy group, there aren't really any, but say you're these people are not my people, there's a natural off-ramp, and you can try a different group. Steve will help you find a better group for you, right? That's an option. So we've built them as ways for you to ease in. There's an on-ramp, there's an off-ramp, and it's built around the rhythms of life. And one of the things that we talk about with small groups is we work really hard to make our Sunday morning talks something that is deep and relatable and something that you're really learning from. But this is the first word, not the last word on a topic. This is meant to start a conversation, not end a conversation. So I hope that what I'm saying is helpful to you on a Sunday morning, but it shouldn't stop at that, right? You should be taking that and then learning from it, going deeper with it. And that's part of what small groups are designed to do. And so small groups launch next week. And if you are not currently in one, I'm going to challenge you to join one for the next 8 weeks. You'll get to really go into depth on this series and really learn what it is to put these things into practice. And if you are scared, you don't know what small group to join, that's why we have Steve here, who gave our announcements earlier, our executive pastor. He oversees small groups, and he's a great matchmaker. He's really good at learning who you are and be like, oh, these people would be the group for you. So have a conversation with him. Try it out. If you hate it, no one's going to barge down your door and be like, hey, where are you? There's natural rhythm with small groups. But if you want to go deeper, find a group of people to commit to. Because I can tell you my small group was essential to getting through this month. They rallied. And when other people were sick, our small group rallied around them. And I know that has happened for you guys as well. So join a small group. Put this series into practice with community. The next thing that you can do is the one another's. In Paul's passage, he talks about a few of those things of what we can do with one another. But there's actually a whole list of one another's. There's over 50 one another's in the Bible, ways that we can practically love each other, ways to put that into practice. And you don't have to go look them up. I looked them up for you. So I want you right now to take your phone out. Everyone take your phone out. I know you have one. Take your phone, and I want you to text this number, 9. I want you to text one another to 94000. If you are watching us online or on your phone, you're going to have to figure out how to multitask or write it down on a piece of paper and go back to it. I don't know. Pause it and go text. You know how to do that. But right now, I want you to take your phone out and text one another to 94000. And when you text that, what you will get back is a link to the one another's, a list of the one another's. And my challenge for you this week is to pick one or two and put them into practice. Put them into practice in your household, at your work, at the gym, wherever you are, in the grocery store. Pick one or two that really stick out to you and put them into practice. You will get a head start on your small group, right? You can go into your small group next week that you're going to sign up for this week if you're not part of one yet, and be ready to be like, this is the one another that I lived into this last week. But pick one or two or three. I mean, if you're an overachiever, pick more than one. But actually, write it down somewhere and keep it with you. And this week, commit to doing that. Because remember, you don't just become like Jesus just because you call him Lord, Lord. You have to do what he says. You have to put it into practice. Okay? So that's the second way that you can practice Christian community this week. And the third one is to practice hospitality, to pursue hospitality. And I know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And we're in the middle of a surge. So having strangers over your house, that doesn't sound like the right thing to do, right? That you don't have to do that. You don't have to have people over to your home to practice hospitality. Hospitality is about creating a place of safety and welcome for someone who's on the outside. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can look at your neighborhood. This morning as I was prepping, I thought, my neighbor across the street, I've met her a couple times, but I know that she's moved here and she doesn't have a lot of family, and it's just her and her husband, and they have her mother-in-law that they're taking care of. And I thought, she must feel pretty on the outside. She grew up in India, and so she feels she's got to feel outside in our neighborhood. And have I done a good job of extending hospitality? I haven't. And the Lord really convicted me that that's a place right there that I can create more safety and welcome, even if it's not inviting them into your home yet. Maybe you want to wait for that. But is there someone at work who feels like they're on the outside? Is there someone at school, students that are in the room? Is there a student on the outside that that they are lonely and they're left out? And can you create a seat at your lunch table? Can you find a way to involve them? At the office, can you bring something to share to bring people together? How can you create a place of safety and welcome wherever you are? Where is a place that you can lean into that you can extend the community to those on the outside and bring them in and make the stranger a friend? And so again, Christian community is not optional. It's not optional. Community is not optional. It is essential. If you want to grow with Jesus, if you want to go deeper in your faith, you have to do it with other people. And I want to talk to those of you in particular who have been on the outside of this community. And that's great. I hope that when we say make yourself at home, we genuinely mean that. We want you to feel at home. Not just welcome home, but like when you make yourself at home, you know like where the cupboard is to go get the cup and get yourself a glass of water. That's what we want it to feel like here at the Well. And I hope that you have felt welcomed. I hope that you have felt like, I really believe this is a special community. It really is. And we really are trying our very best to live the way that Jesus has called us to live together. And so if you've been kind of standing on the outside, checking it out and being like, I don't know, I want to invite you to risk to take a step forward. Just one step forward and find one way that you can go a little bit deeper here. Whether that's if there's someone that you've kind of connected with on the surface level and maybe go to coffee with them. Maybe it's sign up for a small group. Maybe it's start to serve on a team. But find a way that you can take one step closer. Because I can't promise you that no one will ever hurt you here. Like, we're human and people are flawed and people will let you down at times. But I can tell you that we genuinely are trying our best to live out the way of Jesus. And if you want to do that too, if you're willing to bring your flawed self with other people's flawed selves, I believe that that's the best way that you'll grow. All right, let's pray.